Why do different fighters stand completely different from one another, even at the highest level? In this video, we're going to look at a bunch of different fighting stances and talk about why those fighters stood that way and what the outcome was. In what situations did their stance work? And in what situations did it fail them? Is there a single stance that works best in fighting? What are some of the most important things fighters need to think about when choosing a stance? In what situations do top-level fighters change their stance? These are some of the questions we're going to look at in this video, so make sure you watch all the way to the end because we have so much to get through. We're going to take a close look at some of the top Muay Thai fighters from history. We're going to look at top-tier boxers, kickboxers, and MMA fighters. So make sure you're taking notes because this video might just completely change your perspective. Let's dive in. We're going to start by looking at traditional Muay Thai. Right in Thailand, back in the day, here's Namsak Noi, one of the most decorated Muay Thai fighters in Muay Thai history on the left. Look at his stance, so balanced, feet close together, pretty square, hips forward, hands high, elbows slightly off his body. Look how close his feet are together. What that does is enables him to lift his feet up off the ground quickly. His hips are forward, making his upper body a smaller target. And if you take a look at his hands, they're up high. This is a high guard position, slightly off his head, palms slightly turned outward. That's kind of the classical Muay Thai stance. It's pretty neutral, it's safe. It allows the athletes to defend and attack from both sides. There's a lot of advantages to it. Look how the fighters are shifting their weight back and forth rhythmically. And of course, there's traditional Thai reed, flute, and drum playing. Look how fast they get their feet up from this neutral stance. This is a key strategy in Muay Thai. They can lift their feet up quickly to use that teep. It prevents opponents from rushing in. It maintains distance, and it acts as a deterrent. Probably the main reason why Muay Thai athletes stand this way is because kicks, knees, elbows, and punches in Muay Thai are deadly. This stance allows them to address those threats most efficiently. Look at this right here. Look at that kick, and look how fast and how he got his shin up to block. All the way up, and this is so key, and this is why they do this in Muay Thai, why they stand like this in Muay Thai. Those kicks are hard. They're like baseball bats. Muay Thai kicks are not for points. They're for power. They're for damage. So getting those shins up completely neutralizes that kick, and that's very, very key in Muay Thai fighting. Again, look how close their feet are together, how square their bodies are, how high their hands are, how their hips are forward. So this is going to be the base stance that we're going to look at and compare most other styles to in this video. Let's shift focus to a completely different style. We're going to look at a boxer here, and of course, that's none other than Iron Mike Tyson, one of the most feared fighters in history. See how wide his stance is here when he knocks his opponent out. Let's take a closer look. He steps really wide, so different from those traditional Muay Thai fighters. Look how he's shifting his weight from his back foot all the way across to his front foot, way overcommitting his weight, but generating so much power, punching right through his target. See how his feet are much wider than his shoulders, probably 2 or more times wider than that traditional Muay Thai stance, but that allows him to shift his weight all the way over to the other side, increasing the force so much more. It really reminds me of baseball pitchers who take these big, wide steps and shift their weight from their back foot forward to their front foot. That width of their stance is what enables them to generate so much more power than they could if it was just their arms. Here's Tyson in action again, shifting his weight, big, wide stance as he steps forward to generate all that power. His style really depends on it. So no one can argue that that style, that wide stance, power style, shifting weight from one foot to the other, whether that was forward or back, or from one side to another to punch through his target, it worked for Mike Tyson. Obviously, he's one of the greatest knockout fighters in boxing history. But here's a question. Can traditional Muay Thai fighters with that narrow, defensive, cautious stance, that neutral stance, ever stand wide, even just for a moment? I'm going to argue that yes, they can. And I'm actually going to argue that many of the top fighters, even in modern times, do change their stance multiple times throughout the fight, especially when they're looking for that knockout power. Let's look at 3 fighters that, for most of the time, fight with that narrow Thai stance. We're going to look at Narupal Fairtex, Rod Tang, and one of my favorite fighters of all time, Giorgio Petrosian. So take a look at Narupal. Here he is, very, very close together with his feet. Look at this. He goes from that narrow stance, boom. Once he hits his target with that kick, immediately shifting his weight. Look how wide his feet are right here. Look how wide that stance is. So different than how we saw him a moment ago. Again, here he lands that head kick, and when he smells the kill, boom, his feet are immediately really wide as he goes in looking for that power punch to finish the opponent off. Now look at Rodtang right here. Narrow, neutral stance, very square, hands high. But look at this right here. Look how wide he shifted his stance as he lands that big hook. Again, boom, his feet are now twice as wide right here as he lands that power hook followed with a cross. Look at this movement. He throws that leg kick and then immediately switches into a wide stance to land the knockout blow here on Takeru. Look how wide that is. It's like twice as wide as his shoulders at least. He goes from that low kick. I love this step. Immediately, both his feet are coming off the ground at the same time, and instantaneously he's switching into a big wide stance because he's about to load up a bomb. Look at his feet, both off the ground at the same time. As he lands them, he swings through, heavy bomb. Almost looks like Mike Tyson right here, shifting his weight. So much weight on his left foot, and he's just driving forward. He's also leaning forward, way overcommitting himself, but he knows it's the right time to do that. Masterful modification of his stance. Again, here's Giorgio Petrosian, both feet off the ground, just like we saw with Rodtang, as he dips low to load up that right hand heavy. In this case, he's going to throw an uppercut, but most of the time he's going to use this to throw a hook. And he does this in this fight against Pech again and again and again. Let's see it slow motion. He dips, his feet go really wide. He didn't throw a punch that time, but Pech sensed the danger and fell back. But here's Petrosian again on the hunt. Boom, dipping wide to look for that lead hook. Again, this time he faked into a kick. Big wide hook, big wide stance, dipping low, boom, power hook, followed by a low kick. So my next question is, can someone stand in a wide stance all the time and still be able to compete at a high level of kickboxing or Muay Thai? Well, let's take a look at one of the fighters who actually did that. That is Mike Zambides, the famous Greek kickboxer who made a name for himself in the earlier K1 days. Let's take a look at his stance and how he did it. In this fight, he's facing off with Giorgio Petrosian. Notice Giorgio Petrosian is standing with his feet a lot closer than we saw in the last fight. He's standing with his feet really close together because he's opting for a more defensive style, whereas Zambides has got his feet really wide, clearly because he's not intending to move back. He doesn't care much about defense. He cares about landing these big, heavy overhands. And here he goes, just like Mike Tyson, big, wide step, big, wide overhand. That's the shot he keeps looking for again and again in this fight. Pawing with his lead hand, but there's the big overhand. Missed that time. Probably took some damage for this style, probably got outpointed, but you know what? At one point in this fight, he actually lands this overhand and boom, there it is. And that punch actually almost counted as an 8 count. The referee did count it as a slip, but I don't know, kind of questionable. But here's the damage that he had to take for this style. Petrosian found his long knees. Petrosian, again, being a southpaw, his left knee was already loaded. He knew that in that stance, Zambides isn't going to move back, so he would bait him and draw him in, and again, long knees, often to the face. Here he goes again. Zambides in that wide stance, he can't move back that fast. He's looking for damage. He needs to find that overhand. His whole style is built on those heavy hands. So standing wide, you know, maybe it worked for him, definitely did at moments, but this is the risk. It's either Zambides going to land that heavy hand or he's going to get outpointed by the more tactical Petrosian as he did in this fight. So there's Petrosian taking the win. Let's shift our focus to a different type of striker that almost always stands perpetually in a wide stance. That's boxers. In this fight, we're going to look at Manny Pacquiao against Floyd Mayweather, one of the greatest defensive boxers in history. Love him or hate him. So here we go. Immediately we see wide feet and they're kind of knife edge. There's Mayweather pushing off his back foot to shoot in, and there's Pacquiao also pushing off his back foot to shoot in. Pac-Man uses that foot to shoot in quickly, throws these fast flurries, and then he uses his lead foot to push himself backwards to get out. That's why this wide stance, but more on a knife's edge, kind of works for him. Look again, He pushes off his front foot to get himself back out to his back foot. That's his way of defending himself. Here's Mayweather using that back foot to push off to generate his attack. Look at this frame. This is insane. Look at Mayweather's foot right there. All his weight's on that foot. Look how low he ducked. That is insane. Boxers also use that wide stance to enable their head movement. If they can have a wider base, they can move their head further off that center line from side to side, forward or back, and get down real low, as we just saw Mayweather doing with that insane duck. So this leads to the question, can you stand like that using that kind of head movement in a Muay Thai and kickboxing fight? Can it work? Does it work? What is the opportunity and what is the risk? Is there one specific style that's always going to work? Or does it depend on who you're facing, what the risk is, what the opportunity is? That might change round over round, even moment by moment. So as we're starting to see, these fighters, boxers, kickboxers, they change their stance depending on what they're trying to do. If they sense risk, they'll often shift back or opt for a more defensive strategy. If they sense opportunity, that's where they're going to change it up and shift to a stance that enables them to inflict more damage on their opponent. But here, let's look at this fight. This is Mike Bernardo. Mike Bernardo from South Africa, Stan the Man from Australia. This is a early heavyweight K1 fight. So Stan the Man, obviously visibly a lot smaller, opted to use his head movement. He's ducking, head movement, ring movement with, some really good success, as you can see here in these highlights. Boom, ducking, clean miss, very sharp with his head movement. Very classy, and Bernardo looked a little bit frustrated at times. But then, boom, this is how the fight ended. Let's take a closer look. Let's watch this in slow motion. So Bernardo threw a jab, and there's Stan slipping, shifting his weight wide all the way to one side, and he's got his hands down. He attempted to counter, didn't land it. So Bernardo knew right here that if he threw a punch like this, all it took was a little flick of his hand, that Stan the Man was going to lean over again, and he did, and this time right into Bernardo's head kick, perfectly placed. So then, is using head movement a bad thing? Is that the only way that a fighter can be evasive? If a fighter doesn't want to stand toe-to-toe and take damage or risk taking damage, is there another way that they can be evasive? Why don't we take a look at one of the most evasive fighters in history who didn't stand with a wide stance? That's none other than the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. Let's take a moment to just admire his light-footed, evasive style. His feet are not wide, they're very close together. He's very much on his toes. He's dancing all around. He's got his hands down for a lot of it, but he's just so hard to hit. And you can see his opponents flat foot, stalking, trying to get him in so they can slug it out, as was normal at that time for heavyweights. And clearly they're frustrated. He's in and out. He's manipulating range. He's using that light-footed style to go in, to fake, and to get out before his opponents can land anything on him. And then he's got these lightning fast hands. So he uses his opponent's power against them. That's how he knocked guys out. So this guy would overextend. This guy overextended his power, fell right forward, and there's Ali's right hand. He didn't even have to stand very wide or shift a lot of weights to land that heavy blow. He just used his opponent's power against them. And that's perhaps why he was the greatest of all time. So here's another question for you to consider. Does that style of light-footedness belong in Muay Thai or kickboxing? As you may be starting to realize, there is no fixed rule. This is probably the most important point of this video. So if you got this far, congratulations. This is probably the main point I wanted to get across, is that there isn't really anything that is right or wrong. If a fighter can make a style, a stance, a movement, a technique work for them, then it's the right thing to do. If they use a technique or a style or a stance and it fails, then it was the wrong thing to do. And I think the best fighters understand where, when, and how to modify what they're trying to do, opponent to opponent, fight by fight, round by round, moment by moment. So, in other words, everything works sometimes, but nothing works all the time. That is so key. That is one of my favorite sayings, and it's a point that I try to get across to my students all the time. I do think that some of the best fighters really had one core style that they stuck with, and they were just so good at it, and that's why they were so difficult to beat. But as you can see, even the best fighters made some modifications at moments. So let's look at another legendary Muay Thai fighter. In this case, it's Samart Payarakun. He was one of the greatest champions, perhaps the greatest Muay Thai fighter of all time, depending on your opinion. He also happened to be a WBC boxing champion. So let's take a look at how he used the Muhammad Ali style footwork and stance in a Muay Thai setting. Here you go. So that style, look how relaxed that is. My goodness. I mean, he had a fantastic teep push kick. That's one of the things he was known for. And that's one of the things that being light-footed and with your feet close together allows. He wasn't quite as bouncy as Muhammad Ali, but clearly he had incredible ring movement. There's that push kick again. So hard to get through. Look how close his feet are together. This is insane. Again, it just allows the fighters to bring their feet up so quickly. And there's the ring movement. Looks a lot like Ali at moments, dancing around, bouncing on his toes, moving around the ring. And there's that push kick. Now, does that mean he was always defensive? Nope, he knew when to switch it up. Here, he's being evasive, and then when he wants to go in for the kill, you'll notice there that wide stance, and he's moving his head. Looks like a boxer. Looks a lot like, you know, Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather, but then boom, immediately changes it back up to that tall, narrow, evasive stance when he senses the risk. When he wanted to knock out, boom, he absolutely could. Here he is. Look how he's shifting weight. Wider stance for sure. Look how far apart his feet are, and that's allowing him to shift weight into heavy bombs when he knew he was going in for the kill. He was also really good at loading up power kicks, leg kicks in particular, from that tall, narrow stance. He would just take a little skip step and boom, very, very powerful leg kick, just so well timed. So it's not like just because you stand with that narrow stance, you can't use traditional Muay Thai technique. But this is amazing. Take a look at this clip. This is one of the most iconic moments I've ever seen in the history of Muay Thai. Look at his hands. They're down at his waist. Look at that deadly spin kick, which could have taken his head off, but he's not even flinching. He's not even blinking. He just lets this kick go right past his face like it's nothing. Just masterful ranging, masterful awareness. That's probably why he was considered one of the best Muay Thai fighters in history. I really do think that that kind of a style requires that level of mastery. I don't think it's for everyone to stand so relaxed and with their hands down, because if you don't have a high level of mastery, if you're not very good at ranging, if you don't have a very good read on your opponent, this is very dangerous. That spin kick could have been a career-ending kick had it landed. But we are not all Samart Payarakun, so we probably should not attempt to stand and move like him until we have a much higher level of experience than most of us do. We're going to shift focus to a completely different style of fighting and a completely different stance. That is the American karate stance, and this is a very sideways, very light-footed stance that's often used by fighters in MMA like Wonder Boy. You could say that Israel Adesanya has sort of a similar style, although there's definitely nuanced differences. But see how he's very, very quickly. Here's Adesanya. Here's Raymond Daniels, probably the king of the style. Look how he's able to spin around. So what this kind of style gives to the fighter, if they know how to use the technique, is access to both sides. So what I mean by that is, take a look at Raymond Daniels right here. His feet are wide, almost knife's edge. He can kick with his right. He can kick to his right. He can also kick to his left if he spins, and here it is. In this fight, he was so effective with that. Dropped his opponent multiple times and lands these spinning heel kicks right on the button to end the fight. Here's Thompson, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in this MMA fight. Look at this, knife's edge. He can go to his right. His opponent is actually watching that side. He's looking for a strike to come from the standard side, but instead, Wonder Boy spins around the other way. He sensed that his opponent wasn't looking that way, wasn't ready for it, and that kick arguably was really key to ending the fight. What's really key about this fighting style is that it requires space. spinning techniques or using the lead foot round kick or lead foot side heel kick, it really requires a little bit more space than some of the kicks that you would see in Muay Thai or knee strikes, and definitely the close range that is required to land effective boxing punches. Take a look at the space here between Wonder Boy and his opponent, and take a look at the space here between Adesanya and DDP in this MMA fight, and take a look at the space here that Raymond Daniels is trying to maintain in this fight. Now, it allows for a degree of evasiveness. Here's Adesanya. It works great for him when he's able to avoid these hands. He's getting out of the way. He's got mastery over his range and evasion. But look at his opponent really trying hard to close that gap and to close that space. And when he does, if that fighter doesn't have an answer or isn't able to modify their stance, that's where things start to get a little bit dangerous with his stance. So uppercuts, overhands, there's Adesanya fully turning his back. Whether he's tired or hurt at this point or couldn't see it coming, his feet are completely turned away from DDP in this moment. And that was how that fight ended. Here's Raymond Daniels, who's a master of the style. This is an insane knockout. So he uses style very, very well. We're going to take a closer look at it. Look at spinning heel kicks. He's able to maintain his range, and he can pull off all kinds of crazy spinning attacks that he's familiar with, but his opponents aren't. Look at the space that's required here. When he has that kind of space, he's so effective, landing these wicked spinning highlight reel kicks. But we're going to look at two fights where that style broke down for Raymond Daniels, and for two different reasons. The first fight is against Joseph Valtellini from our hometown here, Toronto, Canada. So Valtellini is a wicked leg kicker. So that wide stance of Daniels is not going to work well for him in this fight. That wide stance does not allow fighters to lift their legs up very quickly to check. And if they're not out of range, that leg kick is going to connect like it does here again. Look, so much weight on that lead foot. Cannot lift the leg up to check, can't get out of the way in time, and Valtellini just capitalized on that again and again and again, just lethal kicks. And Daniels is not checking any of them. That stance just does not work for leg checking. He's hurt. Look, he's changing his stance. He's standing southpaw here. And although Valtellini knocked him out with, I think it was a hand or a head kick at the end, I really think it was those leg kicks and the fault of that stance of Daniels against this particular opponent that led to Valtellini winning the fight. Look at those leg kicks, man. That guy's going to be hurting for days. And there's the head kick that ended the fight, but I really think it was the leg kicks that ultimately caused Daniels to win that fight. And not to beat up on Daniels here, because I actually think he's a fantastic fighter. I love watching him. But here's another opponent that just shut him down. Nicky Holzken, Dutch kickboxer. Dutch kickboxing stance very similar to Muay Thai with some slight modifications here. Look, there's a little bit more weight on the lead foot. Typically, the hips are forward, so that's similar to Muay Thai. Elbows are closer to the body, and the hands are typically higher in that high guard. That's more typical of Dutch kickboxing, and they're typically more aggressive forward fighters that like to use their hands. And look what Holzken's doing here. He's really rushing in, and think about what we just talked about. The style that Daniels, the stance that Daniels using, that he's trying to land those spinning kicks there. It needs space, but look how Holzken is just shutting that space down, not allowing him room to use those techniques. He's trying to turn the fight into a brawl. He's trying to turn it into a close range shootout because look here, Daniels shoves him off out of desperation, trying to land those spinning kicks, but Holzken's just ready for it. He's got his guard up high and he's able to close the gap, and very quickly in the first round, there you go, drops Daniels and does it again and again throughout the fight, closing the range, forcing it into a close range boxing fight. But then, Daniels does, when he has space, he has some success. He lands that 8 count, even though Holzken laughed it off. But when the fight ended, it was just Daniels desperately trying to maintain space, and Holzken with that Dutch style just closing the range, getting in close. Daniels is completely helpless here in his stance, doesn't know what to do, and that's the end of the fight. So again, we see some styles work in some situations, but not in other situations. They're going to work against some opponents, but not against other opponents. And if a fighter is stuck on a very specific stance and they end up fighting someone who knows how to expose them in that stance and they can't modify it, that is a problem. So a degree of versatility is so important. It's really important to understand all of these different factors. When you have a wide stance, you can shift weight, you can hit harder, but you're giving up other aspects of defense. When you stand defensively, you may think that you're safe, and you probably are safer, but you might be giving up a degree of opportunity to inflict more damage when the time calls for it. There are advantages to standing knife's edge. There are disadvantages to it. There are advantages to standing wide all the time. There are advantages to standing narrow all the time. It's all about judgment and using the right technique, the right stance at the right time. But let's talk about one aspect that's probably the most controversial. Is it ever okay for a fighter to stand with their hands down? Well, there are some fighters who train that way all the time. Here's Ryan Garcia, love him or hate him. The social media sensation is also a fantastic boxer. I personally like watching him fight. Take a look at these Taekwondo fighters. Their hands are always down. Why do they do that? If you ask high-level Taekwondo coaches, their style depends on fluidity and speed and not telegraphing their kicks. So by standing with their hands down, they're so relaxed, they're so ready to fire. They would rather give up the defensive posture of having their hands up and protecting their face and body to have the advantage of being able to launch kicks quickly. And I'm going to argue that some stand-up strikers in boxing, kickboxing, and Muay Thai can also find success at moments with their hands down. Let's look at some of the greatest fighters to ever have done it. The first name that comes to my mind is Prince Naseem Hamed. He always had his hands down, but he was so fun to watch. Look how he just so powerful, wide stance, and hits really hard because he shifts weight, but it definitely comes with some risks. There he is taking a really good shot, and because his hands are down, his shoulders are down, that one really threw him off balance. Here's Muhammad Ali, and he definitely had his hands down a lot of the time, and a lot of his fights, like this one in particular with Joe Frazier, he paid the price for it. He took a lot of shots, and there he is going down. He could have had his hands up. But then let's look at Ryan Garcia. He's got his hands down here against some opponents, and he's so fast. He's just so much faster. When he landed that shot right in this fight, look how he's just looking straight at his opponent. Fighters don't typically look straight at their opponent's eyes. They're trying to keep their eyes on everything at the same time. But he just knew he had his man, and that last hook just barely smacked the top of his opponent's head, and it finished the fight. Here he is again. He's got his hands down. He's almost using it to bait his opponent. But look at that. He'd rather have his hands down and beat his opponent to the punch rather than give up his speed to defend himself. He just knows that in that moment, he doesn't need to have his hands up, and it gives him a degree of mobility, a degree of agility, a degree of speed advantage over his opponent. And in that moment, you can't say he was wrong. He knocked his opponent out. And again, that comes back to the point that I'm trying to get across here again and again, is that everything can work sometimes, but there is nothing that works all the time when it comes to fighting. So what's your favorite stance? Do you ever modify your stance? Has your stance ever failed you? Have you ever had to make changes to your stance in a fight or in a spar because it just wasn't working for you? Have you ever had a moment of realization by changing your stance where you suddenly realize a completely different dimension of your game? Has your stance evolved over your fighting career? Do you agree or disagree with what I had to say? I would love to hear your opinions. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a lot of fun diving into this. I'd love to continue posting videos like this. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment specifically about what kind of videos you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.